Greetings, everyone. My name is Chandani Jaswal. I'm a core team member here at Karwaan, the Heritage Exploration Initiative. This is the third guest lecture in the Karwaan Indian Art Appreciation Workshop. This is being held in March 2025 and will be premiered on YouTube in May. We're very delighted to be joined for this lecture by Dr. Ursula Weekes. Dr. Ursula Weekes is an independent art historian based in London, specializing in Mughal and Rajput art and culture. Dr. Weekes is the recipient of the Commonwealth Post-doctoral Fellowship at Indira Gandhi National Centre for Arts in Delhi. She read history at St. John's College in Cambridge. Her PhD at the Courtauld Institute was in 15th century European prints, published as Early Engravers and their public in 2004. She's also worked as supervisor of the print room at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, where she published techniques of drawing from the 15th century to the 19th century. She teaches at various academic and museum settings, which includes the Courtauld Institute of Art, School of African Studies, popularly known as SOAS, the V&A Academy, the Victoria and Albert Academy, and formerly also at JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Tonight, Dr. Weekes would be talking to us about Sir John Snow's 18th century Mughal album, From India to England, via the collection of Sir Elijah MP. We're very honored and delighted to have you back with us at Karwaan, ma'am. And we can't wait to hear your views and to hear what our participants have for you in the Q&A session. So over to you, ma'am.
Brilliant. Well, it's lovely to be back at Karwaan. Thank you, Chandani. I think the world of Karwaan, of Ishan, and of yourself and the others on the core team and everything that you're doing. So it's always a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm going to talk to you not just about one album, but about two albums. So let me share my screen without further ado. Could you enable me to share, please?
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I will to share your screen now, ma'am.
Okay, let me just oh, I'm a co-host now. Okay, let's see. Yes, very good. Thank you. Okie dokie. And let me share from the beginning. Where is it? This little thing comes right in the way of where you want. Okay. Play from the start. Okay, so we are looking at A World in Motion, two 18th century albums and their journey to Sir John Soane's collection. One of them comes via Sir Elijah Impey's collection. That's the second one that I'm going to talk to you about. So these are Sir John, let me tell you first about Sir John Soane. He was a very important architect spanning the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century in London. And he has an extraordinary collection, and one of London's best museums is Sir John Soane's museum, because he bequeathed his entire collection to the nation. And his homes, he had three huge townhouses in Lincoln's Inn Fields, which is the sort of quite legal area of London. And he inventively created these three townhouses into an integrated whole. And he collected everything. He collected bits and pieces from the ancient world. He has a huge Egyptian sarcophagus. That's one of his largest items that he collects. But all over, he collects medals, paintings. He has a lovely collection of canalettos of Venice and all sorts of lovely paintings, English paintings of the 18th century. And so most of his collection is actually to do with either the classical world or Europe. And then also Sir John Soane's museum now houses all of his architectural drawings and many of his architectural models. One of the most famous buildings that he designed was the old Bank of England, although the Bank of England building as it is now only has like the lower sections of Sir John Soane's designs. But he's very much working in a sort of neoclassical mode of architecture. So, right, let's see how to move this forward. Okay, so in Sir John Soane's collection, he just has 2 Indian albums. That's the only sort of part of his collection that is Indian at all. But they're 2 really fascinating albums. And so I'd love to sort of unpick these for you because they give us a real snapshot of 18th century India, I think. And then also not only 18th century India, but then this transmission and how they were carried to England and came into Sir John Soane's collection. So the first one is known currently as the Lord Berwick album because it came into the collection. Sir John Soane, purchased it from the collection of Lord Berwick, who's an English aristocrat. But I think that we should rename it as the Ghulam Hussain Khan album because we know, and I'll show you the evidence for this, that this important album belonged to this very significant figure who was a historian in Delhi and then moved to Lucknow. So this is giving you a little insight into the album. Now, as I think I'm speaking to quite an audience quite well versed in Mughal art and in Persian and Indian albums already, but I'll just explain that within the album tradition, there was a practice of having double openings, like an opening that would have beautiful calligraphies, and then you would open, the next opening would be a double page of paintings. And this Ghulam Hussain Khan album follows exactly that same familiar pattern. You can see that it has been rebound. There's this rather horrible red tape. It's very much in need of conservation. And hopefully that conservation will take place before too long. I'm actually currently working with Sir John Soane's museum cataloguing these albums, and the fact that this album needs to be disbound and conserved may give us the opportunity to do an exhibition where we would be able to show multiple leaves at once. Okay, so what's the evidence of Ghulam Hussain Khan's ownership? It's this beautiful seal at the beginning of the album. And then there's this long little detailed note that has been written in Lord Berwick's hand, explaining what is in the seal and also the details that are written here, which date the album and which also mention the actual dates of the album as well. So this is really significant that we know who this album belonged to, and it's bound probably still with its original binding covers here as well. So Ghulam Hussain Khan, he is the author of the Ser Mutakharin, The View of Modern Times, written in the late 18th century. And so he is witness to the very turbulent changes of the 18th century. It's beginning his life working and in Delhi. So he's part of the sort of late Mughal court under Muhammad Shah. But as he as the history of the Mughal Empire unravels, he is part of this gravitational movement into Uttar Pradesh, to Faizabad, and then also to Lucknow, and that's where he is when he's writing this Ser Mutakharin. And so the seal in his album and the inscription notes say that he purchased the album on the 7th of September, 1762. So in fact, this idea, like we're a little uncertain. I mean, it seems from his use of this word purchase that the album comes into his possession at that point rather than necessarily him being the compiler of the album at this point. So, as I've already said, we see these alternate openings of calligraphy and images. And in fact, to me, I think the calligraphies are particularly important in this album. The paintings are lovely. There are some very interesting paintings, but the calligraphy sort of really takes the lead. And that was, a rather Mughal, sort of true to Mughal life, as in that they held a very, very high regard for the calligraphies. And if you like, they are the primary leading aspect of what gives value to the album as well. So in the Mughal library, we know that the highest valuations are given where the calligrapher is the most important factor. So here we have, for example, a beautiful quatrain that is in Nastaliq, and that is by Muhammad Hussain Kashmiri. And so he is the most important contemporary calligrapher at the court of Akbar. And we see a beautiful portrait of him. This is in a Gulistan of Sadi that is written by Muhammad Hussain Kashmiri, and has this lovely colophon portrait. Colophon portrait means a portrait that sort of shows who the author is and who the artist is. And I just have a lovely close-up of this colophon portrait. So this is the portrait of Muhammad Hussain Kashmiri sitting there writing, like his, as it were, writing his name. And then here we have on the left side, the young man is Manohar. And this is one of the first artists' portraits that we have in the Mughal court. I mean, there are not that many self-portraits earlier than this date of 1582. And also, it's really important inscription because this says Manohar, son of Basawan. So that tiny inscription there is the one way in which we actually have documented that the great Mughal artist Manohar actually was the son of the, very famous artist Basawan. And we think the scholarship goes, I think it's particularly John Siler. So we know that Manohar was responsible for painting, just as a young teenager, basically, all the little birds that kind of, sing along with the poetry of the manuscript. And it's considered that possibly the actual portrait here is done by the father, Basawan. So it's sort of like acknowledging the role of his son in the manuscript rather than Manohar necessarily having made this as a self-portrait. I think the argument goes that it shows such a degree of sophistication in the portrait that it's possibly unlikely that he would have achieved this at the age of sort of 15, 16, as he's represented here. So among the other calligraphies we have a work by Said Ali Khan, a Persian calligrapher from Tabriz, and he migrated to the court of Shah Jahan, and he was bestowed, as many such high-ranking artists were, with the title Jawahir Rakam, or jeweled pen. And he also, interestingly, acted as a calligraphy instructor to Prince Aurangzeb, as well as his imperial librarian. So it's quite interesting thinking how a work like this gives us a direct kind of link to the whole theme of the Mughal emperors, Mughal princes as calligraphers themselves. And certainly we know that Shah Jahan, in his princehood as Prince Karam, made an important album known as the Karam album, where you can see him practicing his calligraphy. And actually 4 pages from that album were on the art market last autumn, and I think it was in the autumn rather than in April, and they just absolutely skyrocketed. I think the first page sold for something like £400,000. So that was quite interesting, seeing the value of this imperial, the Prince Karam's own calligraphy. So yes, so here we're seeing how these important calligraphers were involved in the education of the princes. So we also have calligraphy that's by Muhammad Hussain Tabrizi, a 16th century calligrapher from Safavid, Iran. And he was in charge of inscriptions on many monuments and government buildings during the reign of Shah Ismail as well. So it feels like we're seeing a roll call of the finest calligraphers across the Persian-speaking world, the Persophone world. One of the pages that's sort of singled out by its beautiful gold background and this kind of cloud outlining is a page of calligraphy by the great 15th century calligrapher Mir Ali al-Haravi. And he was the sort of favorite calligrapher of the imperial Mughal court under Jahangir. His son had migrated to the Mughal court and brought many of the father's manuscripts and calligraphy with them. And these are what are used really to resource all the major imperial Mughal albums at the time. Notice too, just these lovely fabric borders. These are a really interesting aspect of the album, this Ghulam Hussain Khan album. So you can see how there's like a little block printing here, and it seems to be bespoke printed, as it were, and bespoke cut, because this isn't a join in the fabric. The fabric, I think, has a continuum, but the printing is, I'm not sure if I'm actually exactly right saying that. No, that is a cut in the fabric. Okay, so they're just being like printed and cut and put down. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, but again, just showing you the interest. And I don't know, maybe others who are listening here will know whether those fabric borders potentially might have a more Deccan connection to them. Okay, here we have a page by Mir Khalilullah, and he's also known as Mir Khalil Bakhazi from the city of Bakhaz in Khorasan. And he's a court calligrapher and courtier in the palace of Sultan Ibrahim Adil Shah down in Bijapur in the Deccan. And he becomes so famous for his mastery in Nastaliq that Shah Abbas writes poetry in praise of him. And he says, the sun of Iraq has risen from Deccan soil. Such a jewel of that soil came from its own mine. The leader of the calligraphers of the world, I mean Khalil, the idol destroyer, came. So this is again showing how from the Deccan, from Iran, from the Mughal court, we have examples of all the most famous calligraphers that are being preserved in this album. So let me show you, you know, something of the pages in the manuscript. And there seems to be not such an emphasis on imperial portraiture in this album, but a real emphasis on aesthetics and on holy figures, and also some lovely images of women as well. So on page 29B here, you can see that we're seeing, I think, Myanmar and Mullah Shah, two really important holy men of the mid-17th century, to whom both Dara Shikoh and Jahanara were deeply attached, and their portraits become repeated. They become like a kind of, you know, part of the lexicon really of Mughal paintings that are being made for albums from the 17th century on right through into the 18th, even into the early 19th century, as favoured motifs that are being presented. And then on the right hand side again we can see Mullah Shah here. I love the attention to fabrics is always so interesting. Like here you can see this wonderful pashmina shawl that he wears, and over here I love it's almost like a kind of kanta stitching with the patchwork there, and that refers also to the sort of Sufi heritage as well of patched robes that are symbolic of a kind of lineage and discipleship within the Sufi order as well. Notice this very 18th century interest in the kind of receding perspective here. That's a very typical feature of 18th century landscape painting in the sort of late Mughal period. Also these lovely clouds and so on. I love these very, very colourful backgrounds here as well. So just showing another couple of openings in the page. So on the left side, we have Mian Muhammadi, he's seated on the tiger rug, and he's being visited by Ruhollah Khan, who is the Mir Bakshi of Aurangzeb. Sorry about the typo in Aurangzeb's name. And that it dates to around 1692. So this one you can just see that on the painting there are tiny little inscriptions, so that's how we can be so precise about the identifications. And then again on this right hand side we're seeing a portrait of Mullah Shah, the leader of the Sufi sect to which both Darashika and Jahanara were deeply attached. And these very interior portraits of holy men are almost like works that would be used as you're sort of in prayer or meditation, to be in the presence of your spiritual leader, your spiritual guide. So they have this very, very meditative quality, especially that portrait that is on the right hand side. Notice too, this is another one of these lovely fabric borders, just pasted in a bespoke way to frame the image. And of course we're seeing here probably the inscriptions written on by Lord Berwick himself. Again, two absolutely beautiful portraits that are in openings. And again, you can see how the compiler of the album is taking pre-existing portraits and then extending the images. So within these albums, if you like, you have a number of layers of workmanship that are going on. So you have like the selection of images, the selection of calligraphies. Then you have the album compiler or compilers, maybe involving patrons and artists in discussion together, who are choosing which images will go opposite each other, but then to tie everything together, integrate things. Then you have the artists who will be like making these lovely little architectural designs around. So this is the original portrait here. And then they're creating this kind of like landscape or terrace setting around. I love this one with its lovely bungalow roof and little flower motifs in a very sort of, you know, typical style of like Mughal architecture that's borrowing from Rajput architecture or vice versa. So yeah. And again, here you can see this Sufi ascetic who's holding the rosary beads and got this lovely patched shawl. There's a portrait in the late Shah Jahan album, and I think it might be the same person, in fact, or certainly it's a very reminiscent. The portrait in the late Shah Jahan album is of a standing figure. But here we see this maybe like an aristocrat, a nobleman who is with his hookah pipe here as well. So this has a more courtly feel to it, and this has a more ascetic feel to it. The one in a garden, the other on a terrace. There are also some rather Persian drawings within the album. So it's not just exclusively sort of Mughal. There are also, as we'll see, some works that come from the Deccan, but also these more Persianate works here with this lovely figure with an instrument, like a lovely stringed instrument, beautiful sensibility to that artwork when it's kind of like brush and ink, sort of neem kalam, but with lovely then additions of color and gold within it. And then similarly here, some sort of, diplomatic meeting, but with these lovely vessels. They're just absolutely gorgeous, these vessels that are in the foreground. And I love the carpet as well. And I haven't actually looked closely at what the inscription says on there, so that's something to do. Again, so I'm just sort of building this picture, what an interest there is in kind of aesthetic figures. So on the left-hand side, we see this very, very sensitive drawing of a Hindu sadhu, and on the right-hand side, a dervish of some kind. And so again, you can see how like they're taking an existing supply and then not disguising that, in Jahangir's Gulshan album, the whole background would have been integrated into a new landscape. But here, they're allowing the original artwork to sit and to speak for itself and just creating a kind of landscape around it. But interestingly, when I just looked at this again, it's immediately triggered a memory of a painting that was in the Sotheby's sale in October last year, and which has been said to be attributable to Payag, but you can just see the same. Sorry, it's not a very good illustration, but you can just see exactly the same motif of that figure who is there. I personally am not very convinced about the attributing this work on the right, the one that was in Sotheby's, to Payag. I think it's a later work. But I find it really fascinating. And I think this is one of the broader points to make about these albums, is that you really see the influence, the way in which you've got sort of copy and trace across many motifs. So in the high golden age, if you like, of the Mughal court in the early 17th century, the motifs are being shared within the imperial atelier. By the 18th century, as many artists who had worked in the imperial atelier are now spread out in different parts of North India or in the Deccan, there's a lot more of sort of movement of compositions, of motifs, of different sort of favored, as I say, compositions. And so we see this idea of reuse and like reversal. Like, so it's interesting here that we have a reversal, and I need to look again at the sizes, because obviously when you look at the exact size, you can tell whether there's a method of actual tracing or transfer taking place, or whether it's just a process of copying. But at some, they're quite closely related, those two images. One of the more larger, grander paintings within this Ghulam Hussain Khan album is this wonderful one of a prince stopping for water along at a well as he sort of journeys along. And this is a very favored motif in 18th century Mughal India. And we see it reoccurring in a number of important 18th century albums, such as the Gentle album, which is in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. And I just love the kind of, there's so much sort of under the surface here, and humor with the lady who's offering the prince the water, and then all the other women who are looking on, the ones who are drawing more water, and then his attendant. And there's such a lovely feel to the painting as a whole. And this is probably, by an artist, a Lucknow artist now. So we're seeing both late Mughal paintings in this album and Awadhi paintings, though sometimes it's also hard to disentangle the two, as many of the artists from Delhi are then moving. So here we see examples of some of the paintings of women, and they have a lovely Deccany feel to them, with their rather elongated postures, body figures, and sitting, playing musical instruments. And possibly these figures here have quite a look of the artist Muhammad Reza Hindi, who is an important late Mughal artist. So these are just three lovely examples of the three female portraits in the Ghulam Hussain Khan album. So the Ghulam Hussain Khan album is volume 144, and we're now going to have our last second half is going to be just thinking about Sir John Soane's album, that's volume 145. And this is a grander album, really. And it's got a binding in yellow English Morocco, and the spine is lettered collection of drawings, costumes, etc. of the Persians. And I think this is quite an interesting, already gives us some clues as to who is making this binding. So the album as a whole comprises some paintings from the 17th century, but the majority are some from the early 17th, but the majority are late 17th to mid 18th century. And like we've seen in the Ghulam Hussain Khan album, some are works from the Mughal court, others are from Mughal successor states like now Murshidabad in Bengal. Some seem to have connections to the Deccan. And we also have some fine calligraphies. But exactly how this album came together has a few sort of mysteries in a way. So we'll dive in with the physical evidence. Okay, so we've seen the binding. It's an English binding. We've got Sir John Soane's book plate that's on the inside front cover, if you're thinking in an English kind of way, of how a book opens. And then you can see this end paper here. This is where I've taken the photograph with light shining through so that you can see the watermark in that paper, and it says Cobb patented 1808. So that dates are that means that this binding could not have taken place before 1808. Okay, it could have taken place at any time after, depending on how long after the paper was made somebody used it for this binding. Okay, so the album is approximately 40 by 30 centimeters in size. So that Thomas Cobb, he produced it only in 1807. He first produced a patented paper on paper machines. So it's clear that whoever is, making this binding is sort of right on the cusp of, what is being produced. And all through the manuscript, it's interleaved with Whatman paper that has a watermark dated 1810. Whatman paper is the kind of paper that many East India Company officials are sort of taking out to India in the late 18th century, and company paintings are being made on these. So the folio has 30, the album has 37 folios, and each of them are quite thick, like they're Wesleys with several layers of paper glued together. And then, as I say, they're interleaved with these sheets of Whatman paper. And we have this frontispiece, which, like the binding, says collection of original drawings illustrating the costume, manners, and amusements of the Persians, which already tells us that whoever wrote that doesn't really know their stuff, because these are, mostly works from India, not from Iran. So this is just a little quick video. I don't know if it'll work on Zoom, but I'll just try and play it just to show me turning the pages. And then you get a sense of the physicality of the album here. So one of the things you will have noticed from that video is that this album is not compiled according to the sort of traditional Indian mode of a double opening of calligraphies and a double opening of images. So it seems to have, if we think of this as being bound in England and therefore like working from, an English, a sort of, Western way of opening a book, reading a book, the images are all on the rectos primarily. So the images are being given precedence here. Right, let's move forward. So yeah, this sequencing of pages doesn't follow the Indian conventions. It will have the many times it's the verso that has the calligraphy with a painting on the recto. Now, many of the paintings, so this is the recto, when you turn over, you find this little seal and an inscription here. So what's interesting is that some pages are not fully constituted as album leaves. So this is an example here, this lovely painting that's of Muhammad Shah. Is it Muhammad Shah? No, maybe Bahadur Shah. And you can just see the edge there, and it's kind of like half stuck down onto a sheet of Whatman paper. And this page is just stuck straight onto a stub right here. And on the back, directly on the back of the image, not just on the back of the album page, is the same seal. And I'm going to discuss with you what that seal is there. Okay, so we know from the provenance of this that, so we know from the provenance of Sir John Soane's collection that he acquired the album from an auction of the items of James Perry. So lot 1014 in March 1822. So that's almost exactly 200 years ago, 203 years ago. We've got the curious and extensive library held by Mr. Evans at 93 Pall Mall, which lasted more than a week. And right here, you can see lot 1014, Oriental Drawings, a collection of highly finished and spirited original drawings. And then it repeats that title page. So that implies that it was exactly as this album as he purchased it. Now notice just before, a grand and splendid collection of 139 medals struck at the Royal Mint of Paris, chiefly by order of the Emperor Napoleon. And this copy of the sale catalogue, which is in the Pierpont Morgan Library, brilliantly records that Soane purchased this. Soane purchased the Napoleonic medallions for £100. And also look here, that says Soane as well. And he purchased this for, what does that say? £21. Okay, so I have this very strong theory that Soane actually purchased this album because when you turn over, lot 1015 is a really beautiful 15th century French manuscript, which Soane also purchased. And I can't remember the exact price of that, but it's something like £120 or something. It was like both the expensive ones with the Napoleonic medallions and the 15th century manuscript, which is lot 1015 on the next page. And so I just think like Soane was on a roll. He had seen this lot of like of this album, and he just was in the middle of three. It came in between two lots he really wanted, and so I think he just bought it on a whim almost. And this is the first album that comes into his collection. He buys that Lord Berwick the Ghulam Hussain Khan album after this one in 1827, just before he dies, in fact. So this is the first thing that whets his appetite to buy any Indian material. So that's quite interesting. And James Perry was like the sort of, in England on the BBC, we've got this brilliant reporter called Lise Doucette, who goes to every single kind of war-torn, dangerous situation, reporting from there. And James Perry was a little bit like the Lise Doucette of his day. He had been in Paris during the French Revolution in 1791 to 2. He was originally from Aberdeen and was the father of 8 children. He was a massive bibliophile. One of his children actually went on to become a very important judge and politician in Mumbai in the mid 19th century. And this sale went on for at least a week. And I don't think there was very much that was Indian in the sale either. So yeah, I think there's a strong case for my theory that Soane just buys it because it's right there. It's like a serendipity purchase. But where did Perry get the album? That's the interesting question. Okay, Perry, given that he's not that aware of India, not that sort of, clued up, is likely to be the person who made this frontispiece. And this looks to be his monogram as well, a sort of J and a P interwoven. So Perry seems to be the person who makes the binding. But where did he get these works from? So it's likely that Perry bought the works from the posthumous sale of the collection of Elijah Impey that was held at 73 New Bond Street on the 21st of May, 1810. And that would then fit as well with this rebinding. So if he bought these works, and we've already seen how not every page is as an album page, it's likely that there may have been like a loose portfolio of works that he purchased and then has bound. And he doesn't really understand the Indian way of how to bind the album. So possibly he disrupts and breaks up what might have been the original ordering of it. And then he has it rebound with those Watman sheets that have the watermarks dated to 1810. So this is the seal of Elijah Impey, and it doesn't appear on the back of every page by any means, but it does appear on the back of many. And we also see the inscriptions by Impey's librarian. Now, Impey's very famous for the Impey album. These paintings of natural history paintings command massive prices on the art market these days. 2 of the very famous ones here are an Indian roller and the fruit bat by Bhavani Das. And the Impeys, so Elijah Impey came out as the first Chief Justice of Bengal in 1773. And they are in India for about 7 years. During that time, they have 3 resident artists who are working for them, painting their menagerie and all sorts of other things. And so it seems that Perry is acquiring the items from Elijah Impey's sale. So he almost certainly purchased these 37 folios unbound, and then he puts them together. And Elijah Impey was, a very important Indiophile. He's part of this generation of East India Company people who begin to show a genuine interest in India's history, its culture, its languages, and really want to understand India properly. So Impey himself would never have made that frontispiece. So Impey must have collected this gathering of paintings in Calcutta in the 1770s and 80s. But it's unlikely that they all came into Impey's collection as one group. And the evidence for that is, that we have paintings that are mounted by artists, but by probably librarians employed by Impi. So we have on the left here Nawab Khan Khanan. It doesn't look like Abdul Rahim Khan. I'm not exactly sure which nobleman this is, but he's holding this seal. Maybe somebody will be able to just give me the precise chapter and verse. And then we can also see here the portrait of Nawab Jafar Khan. And this comes from another album, a separate album that is known as the Impi album. So this page is in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And just notice the mounting, and also notice these cartouches and the very, very lovely clear hand of Impi's librarian there. So a number of pages have these gold flecked borders in our Soane album. And then we see here on the back of these pages, clearly connecting them to Impi, the seal, and then the very clear, lovely writing, Tasvir Nawab Khan Khanan, that is written there. And you can see, I think, the similarity in the beautiful hand there. So I want to sort of, show you some of the highlights from the album. It has more of a kind of imperial element to it, and a sense of portraiture about it. So on the left-hand side, you can see a painting of a woman in the zenana. She's having her hair combed. She's listening to a lady who's playing music to her. But what I find really fascinating is how beneath it is written Nur Jahan Begum. And so we see in the 18th century this idea that the idealized, beautiful princess of the Zenana, to give her an identity, is always identified as Nur Jahan, as this kind of it's detached really from the historic personality of Nur Jahan, and is more now a kind of trope, if you like, for the idealized beautiful woman. We see here some of the late 17th century portraits within the album as well. So here we have Firoz Jung, who is a Mughal governor of Gujarat under Aurangzeb. In terms of some of the early 17th century works, there's an absolutely beautiful Jaroka portrait of the Emperor Jahangir, certainly that dates to the reign of Jahangir. And I attribute this to Dowlat. It's got a very similar handling to a portrait that's signed by Dowlat, that again has this quite use of quite a dark background and a lot of gold within the sort of drawing of the portrait as well. And this is probably a portrait dating from 1620 to 25. So quite late on in Jahangir's reign. I love the very precise way he sort of portrayed his earring and how it sort of sits within his ear. And then there's also this lovely band of rubies and emeralds. And you can see the very naturalistic detail of the hand that just goes over the ledge, which was a really important part of the sort of function and concept of these Jaroka images, because they're sort of borrowing from the idea of the European frame as a marker of presence, elided with the window of the Jaroka Darshan, which was a ceremony in the Mughal court that the emperor would give an auspicious audience of in this window that would frame him as well. So it's the artwork and the ceremonial presence of the king are fused in this codified Jaroka format here. there are also a couple of lovely portraits that are set onto a page. So I was saying some of the pages have these borders that are gold flecked, which we can associate with Elijah Impey's workshop, but others have these lovely like papers, thin papers that are kind of glued down onto the Wesley that give like a solid block of color as the border. But here we see these two lovely medallion portraits, excuse me, one of Dara Shikar and then one probably of Shah Shuja. Shah Shuja, you think his lips rather protrude, his top lip protrudes a bit. So whenever you see them a bit like that, like both lips coming forward, I always think of that as particularly Shah Shuja. So I'm sure that looked lovely on your screens. Then we have like Mughal revival paintings, if you like. So early 18th century, you know, this whole legacy of the Mughal emperors and the way in which that legacy is celebrated in the painting of like the Mughal successor states at Lucknow and Murshidabad. So here we have on the far right Shah Jahani painting that is of Babur seated in a landscape for then in the here on the left hand side you can see a painting that very deliberately is sort of using that prototype to make a painting of Babur. Here we have probably a Bengal Murshidabad portrait of Akbar, and he's typically shown in his three-quarter profile, which becomes a kind of codified form of Akbar's portraiture later in these posthumous portraits. I mean, indeed, in his own reign, Jahangir Akbar was mostly portrayed in three-quarter profile. We've already seen these two paintings. Well, the painting on the left we've had a brief look at. But on the right hand, we can see a portrait of the Emperor Shah Jahan. And these also seem to be Lucknow works of the 1780s, typically because you're seeing this very large figure set against the background with this kind of like Lilliput landscape, if you like, with the landscape, but then with all these little diminutive sort of forms and trees there. So yeah, they're incredibly refined work that you're seeing there. Just look at these details that are being shown. So again, like a Lucknow copy of a work that is known from the late 17th century. So Khan Jahan Bahadur Kolkatash, who is one of the foster brothers, the milk brothers of Aurangzeb. And this is a very grand composition, which is also known almost in sort of exact copy from other albums as well. And you can see this very lovely sort of, you know, hangover from the sort of Shah Jahani motif of the whole imperial entourage in the background. Just look at this lovely, the fish standard, the howdahs, all the horses, really incredible detailing in this work. This is one of the only signed paintings. So this is the painting where I was showing you that it's not on a fully constituted album page. In fact, you can't like you can't look right on the back of this page because it is pasted down on two sides to this Whatman sheet. But this is Bahadur Shah, and the little signature is right here on the corner of the throne. I just see, yeah, you might just be able to see just right there. It says Akil. So this is, you know, very definitely placing it with an important court artist. Here we have Kilich Khan. I'm just looking at the time. I'm probably going on too long. Is that right? Because I can see Chandni. She's put her camera on, which means I'm going on too long.
No, we have time. We have, like
okay.
I said, we have an hour of your time, but we're happy to have you for 2 hours or more.
Okay, one of the things that I find really interesting about this album is there's quite a focus on the whole Farrukhsiyah period as well. Raja Ratan Chand here, I love this portrait. He is the real sort of kingmaker of the Mughal Empire, and he's the Divan of Farrukhsiyah. And in a way, you know, we think of the Saeed brothers being the kingmakers of Farrukhsiyah, but behind them, there is also Raja Ratan Chand playing a very important important role there as well. I just love this portrait so much, like how you can see his punch dagger, his pan, his spittoon here. He's got a lovely patka that he holds, and I love the sort of, you know, black and white within his beard, beautifully described there. Now, these are two portraits of those Saeed brothers who play such a key political role with the early 18th century, as we see this very unstable period. So on the left-hand side, we've got Nawab Abdullah Khan Qutb Mulk, who's the sort of preeminent of the brothers. He abolishes the jizya tax, propels Farrukhsiyah to power, and effectively wins the sort of competition for Farrukhsiyah to become emperor in 1713, and so therefore insists on becoming the vizier. And then his younger brother is on the right-hand side, Nawab Najmuddin Ali Khan. So again, seeing these very contemporary 18th century portraits. This is one of my favorite portraits in the album. This is Fazlullah Khan, the keeper of arms under Aurangzeb. And then he also becomes the Bakshi of Burhanpur under Farrukhsiyah. And you can see like this whole shift, like, you know, in the mid 17th century, this would really only be an emperor who would be portrayed in such a kind of grand, static, equestrian portrait, holding that lance. You know, he's borrowing completely from Payag's portrait of Shah Jahan, and yet here this is an important nobleman, and he's got the most amazing boots. Like, look at his gorgeous boots that match his patka and that also match the little tip of his scabbard as well. And the horse has incredible jeweled bridal wear as well. And here we have Kamaruddin Khan. He is also a Bakshi under Farrukhsiyah, and he becomes the vizier of Muhammad Shah. So we just see like that you're getting a very interesting roll call of important political players through the early 18th century within the album. And then again, we have Nawab Safdarjung, who is a very important nobleman who essentially founds then the Asaf Shah dynasty in Hyderabad. So again, we're seeing this like cusp of the breakup of the Mughal Empire, if you like, within the album. Now, I already showed you this painting earlier, but here's a lovely close-up looking at this beautiful, I mean, her diaphanous robe here is just so gorgeous. So the detailing in this album is absolutely wonderful. And so this is a page that doesn't have Elijah Impey's seal on it, but it does have an inscription that is seemingly by that same hand of the librarian. This is an interesting little medallion where underneath has been written in that librarian's hand, Kial, imaginary. And I love that because it sort of speaks into this whole conversation about female portraiture. And here, obviously, taking from its source a European medallion portrait. And yet the woman, she's got her bindi there, and then there's this importance somehow of like writing down and saying that she is imaginary, not to sort of, as it were, justify her rather seductive look, and compare that to this lovely, more, I think, Bikaneer motif of a woman who's very covered up in her robes. But then we also see, so there's the kind of like pleasures with the women, but then there are also a few sort of other types of images within the album. So on the left side, we can see the opium takers, and it is written Majlisi Pustian, an assembly of opium takers, a late 18th century painting, and then also an 18th century painting of Krishna holding up Mount Govardhan there. Now, the finale of this album is an amazing, amazing painting of a mango, which when I first saw it, I just fell in love with it. And this was actually, when I went back to restudy this album, it was like the first thing I went to study post-COVID. We were saying right at the beginning, today is almost like the anniversary of the first COVID lockdown. The first time I went back to a library after COVID, it was to Sir John Soane's library to see this. And I just fell in love with this beautiful mango all over again. You can see how there's a little inscription on the side. I think I might have a close up. Yeah, Arnby is written there. And you can see how beautifully sort of like closely observed it is. It has a kind of illusionism around it, all these lovely little dots on the skin and so on. And then the decoration, I think the little sort of decorative patterns that are placed alongside it maybe are Murshidabad work. But to me, I have this little kind of question in my mind as to whether the mango, it's so different to the other kinds of works in the album. And yet, what were Impey's artists doing? They were making all these beautiful natural history paintings of birds, of animals, but also of flowers and plants and so on. And so I think there's just possibly, there's this possibility that the mango may be the work of one of Impey's actual artists, and that it comes into the very end of his album, that it's just a little fragment that's there, and he adds it into the album. So I think that is the end of my slideshow. Yeah. So over to you guys for some questions.
Can you see us, ma'am?
I can see you. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to stop sharing, or shall I keep the share?
Dear audience, if you have any questions pertaining to the slideshow, we will request ma'am to please let us continue looking at the slides, because I do have questions, ma'am. Can I go ahead with mine?
Yeah.
Right. So ma'am, it would be all right if we take 10 minutes of your time now, because we had reserved an hour.
Yeah.
Great. So ma'am, I had a question with regard to, I had 5, so I'll just start with 2.
5.
Love it. The thing is about the use of the cypress as a motif in the background. We see that happening in early Mughal paintings. Yeah. And Professor Seiler sort of connects it with the Hamida Banu's Ramayana when he says that this makes an appearance because it's a Persian motif. What is it still doing in Mughal paintings now that the Mughals have, they're ebbing in a way, but the cypress remains? Is it symbolic of something else other than the Persian landscape?
Was there a particular painting you were asking that question with reference to, or not?
Yes, ma'am. The Miami paintings that we had, both the paintings.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. Okay, hang on. Let me just see if I go. I wonder if I can just go back to it. Okay, I know this is the only simple way to do it. We'll just like flick through, and then you get a reminder of what we've been looking at. Was it this one here? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. This one and the one before this, the one which had English me written. The one before this. No, that's the one. Sorry, I mixed up my question. That's the one that you showed us.
Just this one.
Yes. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that by the time you are in, I mean, I think John Seiler's right. It's like a very passionate motif. It's a motif that we also see very extensively, for example, in Nur Jahan's commission for the tomb of Itmadaula. And so I think that it's a motif that carries on, but has this kind of symbol, because there are many people of Persian origin still. And there's a very strong kind of Persian identity within the Mughal court, and people, you still have like the Mughal court as a real magnet for the Persephone world, and many scholars from Iran finding, you know, their work and their life, you know, there. I mean, and we also find artists, you know, going in the other direction. Like, oh, was mentioning the work of Muhammad Reza Hindi, and he seems to go from Delhi and then be working at the court of Nadir Shah after, you know, the looting of the imperial library. So I think there's a lot of movement, and I think by then it's become this beautiful like motif that is accepted into the kind of lexicon that doesn't necessarily carry exactly the same kind of iconographic freight that it might have 100 years before.
Thank you, ma'am. I do have more questions, but I'll let the other people ask, and then maybe I could message those questions to you later.
Yeah, of course.
Ma'am, so Mohini has a couple of questions. She wanted to know first the purpose of this album, the first album that you showed us. And was it a magazine of their times, or would it be commissioned for purchase by nobility to show patronage of the arts?
So I think that it is not made for the open market. So it is purchased by Ghulam Hussain Khan, but I don't think it's that it's like at a period where all the old Mughal nobility are kind of like, you know, everyone, life is changing for everyone, you know, the whole kind of lines of patronage, their salaries, their jagirs, the, you know, the set salaries and so on. So I think that there is a lot of sale and purchase of, there's a lot of an art market of items that people are selling or passing on, things like that. So I think the purpose of the album is to be, you know, the kind of item that aristocratic people wanted, that noblemen wanted, in emulation of the royal family, the you know, and that they have the ability to acquire these things, and it's like a work, yeah, or that shows your erudition, your civility, and a part of how these aren't just works you look at on your own, but they're part of the gathering, your gatherings, you know, when you have a majlis and so on, you look at these things together. And so therefore, if you are a person of learning and a person of quality, then to own such a thing is important.
So, ma'am, when the company officials are also collating their murakkas, are they doing it in imitation of the Mughal masters, or is it something that comes from within? Are they connoisseurs of art, and that is why they're doing it?
Do
Companies.
you know, it's a very interesting question that you ask, and I think that there's an element of both sides to that they are connoisseurs of art, and they are, especially this generation from the sort of 1780s onwards, and they really want to you know, they want to understand India, to collect, to bring things back, but then also, you know, they are also receiving things as diplomatic gifts and whatever, to also to, you know, bring home or to pass on to, you know, the king or whatever, and so they're understanding the value of these items within Mughal culture too, and understanding the kind of political currency that is conveyed through such works.
Thank you, ma'am. Mohini's second question is, why would this album be available for sale in 1822 in Paris? Would it be someone sold this in Mughal India because they needed money?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What I haven't yet had time to do is go and really search through Lord Berwick's papers as to where he acquired the album. So I don't believe that he traveled to India. So yes, I think that what we are seeing is how these items were in motion, were circulating, being carried like long distances. So yeah, Ghulam Hussain Khan has the album at the back end of the 18th century or second half of the 18th century, and yeah, within a generation it is available for sale.
Thank you, ma'am. Anamika has asked a question. She wants to know, how have the block printed fabrics been attached as a kind of border or frame to the artworks? What material are those? Do we know the provenance of these block printed fabrics?
So I don't really know anything about the provenance of those block printed fabrics. What I can tell you is that they're beautifully cut, they're printed. I mean, they're refined without being super refined, I would say. They have these nice little stripy borders at the edge. And then they're just cut and glued as a frame over the image as part of the compilation of the album. I have heard suggested that they might show a Deccan influence. I actually don't have a category for assessing that myself. I don't know if anyone else has an opinion about that.
Thank you, ma'am. Mohini has another question. She wanted to talk about the fruit and the bat image. She feels that the language of both the paintings is very different. And if you could give a comment on that, are they different? And if yes, why are they so different?
The fruit and the bat.
Yes.
Well, they are by two different artists, both working for Impey. And I think that, you know, there is this, like, I think with the birds, there's often like little elements of branches that they're resting on. Whereas here, Bhavani Das has really wanted to show the like open wing of the fruit bat, and he's also trying to fit it onto the whole page. So he's kind of trying to show everything about the bat, right? So here we're seeing the folded wing, and so there he opens up the wing. And so yeah, this, I mean, there is quite, I think, a variation across some of the pages of, and some do have this much starker, but both of them in a sense are abstract too, set against, there's a little more setting for the bird. But yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Uh, uh, Anamika, please go ahead and ask your question either by unmuting or by writing the question in the chat box. She wants to follow up with the previous question that she had about the border, ma'am.
Okay.
And she's asked, have you seen this kind of block printed frame in any other document?
I can't think directly that I have, no. But I mean, I always think of block printing as being, you know, a very Rajasthan thing as well. So, I mean, I'm not saying, I don't know. I am, yeah, I've not seen it used in this way as a framing device before. I'd be interested in if any of your listeners have.
Ma'am, I remember seeing flowers in the background, and those flowers which don't seem painted, but I don't know if they're printed or not because I only seen the digital versions of that. I'm reminded of this painting that is used by in the Venetian in the Mughal court book by it's a book called on Niccolo Manucci's life, and there's this
Okay.
painting which has been on at the back. I have the book. I'll show it to you later. That
Mm.
uses a lot of flower, but I'm not sure if it's block painting or not. But we do have a lot of flowers being used in the background anyway as embroidery, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only one that I can think of. But they don't. But the borders don't usually have a story, right? They may or may not have a story.
So I think we're talking about, let me just go back. What we were particularly talking about there were these borders, like, I just find a nice page. Yeah, like this.
Yes.
Rather than them being like the floral motifs of the floral borders of like albums like the Minto album. This is something very different, isn't it? With, you know, a sort of block printed design that then is, you know, being just placed down. You know, they are being made in a bespoke way for the album, but in another way, they're not necessarily like, there is that sort of cut and pasting here. So you could have a long strip of it, couldn't you? And you just are cutting and adjusting it then around the image for the correct size.
Mhm. Ma'am, there's a question by Anurag who says that it's more of an observation. And he says that, but looking at the mango painting made him think how it was perhaps even more realistic than the portraiture uh, samples that we saw, and that perhaps it was one of the favorite fruits. And is that the reason why it's been drawn in such detail, in greater detail than men?
Well, I think the point about the mango is it's on a completely different scale. It's not painted on a Indian miniature scale, if you like, right? It's like almost like a life-size little mango in the way that it's painted on the page. I'll just get back to it. So I think that kind of like sense of illusionism and how it's done here, just set against this background, like with nothing else there. To me, it's like it's and very, very clearly the work of an Indian artist who is sort of working in that more field of botanical illustration, for want of a better word, under probably an East India Company patron. That's what it feels like to me, because really, you don't really like, okay, we do get some beautiful little details of still life in Mughal paintings, but not where it's such a kind of focus in a very illusionistic way on a fruit like that. So that's why I personally think that this is one of the artists working for Impey, given that we know what a close connection there is to Impey in this album.
Ma'am, Mohini asks, seeing these works as an art historian, does it give an idea of the decline of the dynasty, or does it seem more like a cover up for the waning of the dynasty?
Well, I think to me, it gives more of an idea of the sort of dispersal and what's happening to, different aristocratic collections as, they are become available for purchase to people like Impey, or, how Ghulam Hussain Khan acquires his album. So to me, it's not like a cover up of, maybe I haven't fully understood the question, but that they very much capture a snapshot of a changing picture of art patronage, of subject matter, of like Mughal legacy rather than imperial court.
Thank you, ma'am. We've already gone 20 minutes above time. So I'll ask the 4 other questions that I have via message. And if anybody else has your questions, please message them to me by tonight so that I can share it for Dr. Weekes' purview. Till then, please join me in thanking Dr. Ursula Weekes for her time, for her scholarship, and for her patience with all our questions. Thank you very much, ma'am, for sharing this preservation work that you're doing with the albums, and for then giving us your insights into it. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Stop recording.